It's terrible that after 50 years, it is behind closed doors.
The memorial service was meant to be solemn, silent, and sacred. But within minutes, the entire royal schedule collapsed under one shocking decision. Prince William saw Camilla's brother outside the venue, stopped in his tracks, and made a call no one expected. The doors did not open, the guests were not seated, and the service meant to honor the past became a battlefield over loyalty, trust, and royal control. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not raise his voice. That made the moment colder. The prince stood near the entrance with his jaw set, watching the man outside as if one wrong step could tear open something the palace had tried to bury. The memorial service, a private royal tribute created to honor someone connected to the crown's sensitive past, had been planned with a strict guest list, selected seats, and trusted aides only. Every name had been checked. It was a protected royal ceremony, meaning an official family event where access, order, and dignity mattered as much as grief. Camilla waited in a side room, believing the mourning would move according to tradition. Then the door opened, and one aide entered with a face that told her the truth before his words did. The queen consort gripped the edge of her chair. She asked whether there was a delay. The aide hesitated. That pause wounded her. William had cancelled the memorial after spotting her brother outside moments before the ceremony was due to begin, and he had done it without asking her permission or waiting for Charles. Charles received the message in silence. The king looked down at the note, then set it aside as if it had weight. He knew the service had crossed from ceremony into crisis. A senior aide moved toward the entrance table and removed the printed order of service, the small booklet that tells guests what prayers, readings, and tributes will happen. That act changed everything. It told staff this was not a delay. It was a full stop. William gave one instruction, and the room held its breath. No one enters until I know why he is here. The prince's anger was controlled, but the betrayal behind it was impossible to miss. Camilla's brother was not merely standing outside. To William, he represented a broken boundary, a private door opened by someone who should never have had the key. And to understand why one man standing outside a royal venue could freeze an entire service, we must first step inside the family wound that made this moment explosive. Behind the cancelled service were not just names on a royal program. There was William, carrying the weight of duty and memory. There was Camilla, caught between family loyalty and palace suspicion. There was Charles, forced to watch another private fracture become public. And standing outside it all was Camilla's brother, whose presence turned grief into alarm before a single hymn could begin. William had entered that morning already under pressure. The prince knew the memorial was not just another ceremony. It was a royal tribute, meaning a formal act of remembrance, arranged by the family to honor a person or moment tied to the crown's history. If the service went wrong, the mistake would not feel small. It would feel like disrespect. That is why William had pushed for a tighter guest list, fewer private invitations, and no surprise arrivals. Camilla had arrived with a very different feeling. The queen consort believed the arrangements were settled, the seats were approved, and her family circle would not be questioned on a morning shaped by grief. She expected quiet respect. She expected order. But when the aide came to her door and told her the service had been stopped, Camilla's face changed. She did not ask about the hymns. She did not ask about the guests. She whispered that William had turned a family matter into a public insult. Charles felt the damage before anyone explained it fully. The king's equerry handed him a short note, and Charles read it twice. An equerry is a trusted royal aide who helps manage private schedules, messages, and official movements. And this message was too serious to ignore. Charles set the note down without speaking. That silence told the room he understood one painful truth. This conflict had not started outside the chapel. It had only arrived there. William saw Camilla's brother near the entrance and felt the old warning return. The prince's face hardened because the man's presence did not feel like confusion. It felt like a test. The guest list had been restricted. The entrance area had been controlled. And yet Camilla's brother was there, close enough to disturb the service before it began. Camilla felt cornered by the meaning of it. The queen consort believed William had judged her family before hearing her side. But William believed the boundary had already been crossed. Then, a private seating list appeared, showing Camilla's brother was never meant to be near the entrance at all. William asked who authorized the arrival. One aide lowered his eyes. And in that tiny silence, the hidden backstory began to rise. Because the cancellation was not born in that single instant outside the chapel. It was the result of a private trigger that had been burning beneath the surface for weeks. Every royal crisis has a moment people later call the beginning. For William, it was not the sight outside the memorial venue. It was a dinner weeks earlier, held behind closed doors, where one careless remark changed everything. By the end of that evening, William believed a line had been crossed. Camilla felt accused, and Charles understood that the next confrontation would not be easily contained. William had arrived at Clarence House expecting a difficult but respectful conversation. Clarence House is a royal residence, a private working home used for important family meetings away from public noise. That night, the memorial plans were meant to be discussed quietly among Charles, Camilla, William, and a small circle of relatives. The service mattered because it carried grief, duty, and family memory in one fragile moment. One wrong name in the wrong place could turn remembrance into scandal. Camilla tried to keep the dinner calm. The queen consort spoke softly about seating, arrivals, and family sensitivities, believing her brother's connection to her private life should not become a problem. Charles listened with care, hoping the evening would settle tension instead of creating more. But then Camilla's brother mentioned the memorial guest list before William had even received the final briefing. The words landed hard. Too hard. William went still. The prince slowly pushed his chair back from the table, not in anger alone, but in disbelief. The guest list was still under palace review, meaning it had not yet been fully approved or shared with every senior figure. That detail mattered, because memorial access was supposed to be limited to protect dignity and privacy. If Camilla's brother knew names before William did, then someone had spoken outside the approved circle. Camilla defended him at once. She insisted her brother meant no harm, that he had only repeated what he thought was already known. But her voice tightened when William asked the question no one could ignore. How did he know? The queen consort looked toward Charles, searching for support, but the king's face had already changed. Charles understood this was no longer about manners. It was about trust. William did not shout. That made the moment worse. The prince said the memorial could not carry private leaks, family favors, or surprise access. Camilla heard accusation in every word. Charles heard warning. Later that night, William requested a revised access protocol, a security rule setting who could enter, where they could stand, and who could approve changes. Informal family privileges were quietly removed from the plan. So when Camilla's brother appeared outside the service, William did not see a guest. He saw the return of the breach he had tried to contain. And once that old breach stepped back into view, the morning moved from suspicion to confrontation with terrifying speed. The most explosive moment did not happen in front of the crowd. It happened in a narrow private corridor, away from cameras, where William and Camilla faced each other with no room left for politeness. The cancelled service had already stunned the palace, but the confrontation that followed revealed the deeper truth. This was no longer about one memorial. It was about who could still command trust. William asked for Camilla before any public explanation could be released. The prince knew the palace statement would matter, because once the public heard even a hint of the cancellation, every word would be judged. A royal memorial is not just a family gathering. It is a formal act of remembrance, tied to the crown, and stopping it sends a message far beyond the room. That is why William wanted answers before the palace gave the world a single sentence. Camilla stepped into the corridor, with hurt already burning behind her eyes. The queen consort had expected Charles to speak first, but the king stayed in a nearby room, deliberately absent from the opening exchange. Charles's silence forced William and Camilla to face each other directly. No one could hide behind rank. No one could soften the damage. The prince looked at her and said the memorial could not go forward while unauthorized family access remained unexplained. Camilla's shock turned into wounded fury. She told William he had humiliated her brother, and worse, he had made grief look like punishment. The queen consort's voice trembled, but she did not step back. She believed her family had been treated like suspects on a morning meant for remembrance. William listened, but his face stayed firm. The prince believed the service had already been wounded the moment a restricted boundary was crossed. William placed the guest sheet on a side table. The document was simple but deadly in meaning. A restricted guest sheet is the approved list of people allowed into a protected royal event, and every crossed-out name shows who no longer has permission to attend. The prince tapped one name that had been removed weeks earlier. Camilla looked down. Her brother's name was there, marked out before the mourning ever began. Camilla did not answer at once. William asked whether her brother had been told to wait outside, and the silence became louder than denial. The queen consort's hesitation changed the air between them. It suggested knowledge. It suggested fear. It suggested that this was not confusion. Charles remained out of sight, but the king felt the weight of every second. William finally said the final decision no longer belonged to emotion. It belonged to control. But control inside the monarchy is never simple, and the next question became more dangerous than the confrontation itself. Who had the power to cancel a royal memorial? A royal memorial may look ceremonial from the outside, but inside the palace, every door, every seat, and every name carries power. When William canceled the service, he did more than stop an event. He exposed the machinery behind royal authority. Aides moved in silence. Charles withdrew into thought. Camilla waited for support that did not come, and William discovered that his command had already changed the room. William stood firm while the palace operations team gathered behind closed doors. The prince knew this meeting mattered because it would decide whether his order was seen as protection or overreach. A palace operations team is the group of senior staff who manage royal events, security movement, guest access, and official timing. Their job is to keep the family protected and the public message controlled. But this time, they were not managing a normal delay. They were measuring the power of a future king. Charles read the internal briefing alone. The king removed his glasses, rubbed his forehead, and stared at the page longer than necessary. The briefing explained that William had stopped a private royal service after an access concern, meaning someone appeared near a protected event without approved permission. Charles understood why that mattered. A memorial carries grief, but a royal memorial also carries the crown's dignity. If access could be bent by private family pressure, then every sacred moment became vulnerable. Camilla waited outside the discussion room and felt the silence cut deeper than any argument. The queen consort expected Charles to call her in, or at least overrule William, but the king did neither. Camilla's hurt turned heavy, because his silence told her something painful. Charles was not ready to defend her brother, and William was not being treated like a son who had gone too far. He was being treated like a man who had acted within authority. A senior courtier gave the confirmation that changed the balance. A courtier is a trusted palace official who advises and manages royal decisions behind the scenes. In a documented internal account prepared for the family, the courtier confirmed that William had the authority to halt the service if he believed access protocol had been compromised. That statement gave the prince more than support. It gave him control. William heard the decision and did not celebrate. The prince knew victory in a family crisis still felt like loss. Camilla's brother had appeared outside after the Clarence House dinner had already triggered Titan's supervision, and that made the arrival a direct breach of the revised plan. Camilla felt the meaning instantly. Her family circle had been placed outside the protected line. Charles stayed quiet, because the king knew the hardest part was still ahead. Once the power question was settled, the emotional cost began to spread faster than any official statement could contain. And as doors closed inside the palace, the first visible signs of fallout began to appear on the faces of those left waiting. The cancellation did not end with William's order. It moved through the building like cold air. Guests were turned away. Staff lowered their voices. The music prepared for the memorial was never played, and Camilla, who had entered expecting dignity, found herself standing in the wreckage of a decision that made her family name the center of a royal storm. Palace staff began speaking in careful, lowered tones. They told attendees the memorial service had been cancelled because of an internal protocol issue, a phrase that meant a private rule about access, safety, or order had been broken. The words sounded calm, but the meaning was brutal. A royal memorial is built around respect. When it stops before it begins, people do not just wonder what happened. They wonder who was powerful enough to stop it. Camilla sat alone after the door closed. The queen consort folded her hands tightly and stared ahead as if one breath too loud might break her composure. She had expected a service. She had expected support. Instead, Camilla had been overruled in a moment tied to her own family, and the shame of it settled heavily. Her brother had not been allowed inside. He had been escorted away from the public approach, and that single action made the message clear. William stood near a window and carried a different kind of pain. The prince knew his decision had protected the service's integrity, but protection did not feel clean. It had wounded Camilla. It had placed Charles in a painful position. It had turned a day of remembrance into a test of loyalty. William had acted for the crown, but the future king still felt the human cost of making the right decision at the worst possible time. Charles watched the fallout and did not move to reverse it. The king heard that guests were being redirected and that the entrance had been cleared, but he never asked for the service to be restored. That silence mattered. It signaled that Charles understood the breach was serious enough to justify the pain. He knew a memorial could be rescheduled, but trust, once damaged in public, could not be easily repaired. A palace aide noticed the guest book being removed before anyone could sign it. A guest book is a formal record where attendees leave their names, and taking it away meant the day would not be remembered as a completed service. It had been erased before it could begin. Camilla felt that erasure deeply. William felt the weight of causing it. Charles felt the monarchy tightening around all three of them. Yet just when the fallout seemed ready to harden into blame, an unexpected private meeting changed the emotional direction of the crisis. Because after the anger, after the silence, and after the cancelled hymns, two people finally speak, without aides, titles, or protection between them. The turning point did not arrive with a statement or a royal decree. It came in a small private room after the service had been cancelled. When Charles asked William to sit down, no aides entered. No papers were passed across the table. For the first time that day, the crisis stopped being about protocol and became something more painful. A father and son facing what trust had become. Charles looked at William for a long moment before speaking. The king had already confirmed that the memorial would not proceed, and that mattered because the decision had now moved beyond anger. A memorial is a formal ceremony of remembrance, meant to honor grief with dignity, and canceling one is never a small act. It tells every person involved that something serious has broken through the silence. Charles knew William had not stopped it lightly. William sat across from him with the strain still clear in his voice. The prince admitted the cancellation hurt him. He said the service mattered, the tribute mattered, and the people who came to honor that memory mattered. But allowing the breach to stand would have hurt the monarchy more. William believed one unchecked arrival could turn protected grief into private advantage, and the future king could not let that become normal. Charles listened without interrupting. The king did not defend Camilla in that moment, and he did not scold William either. He simply carried the sadness of a father who understood his son had chosen duty over comfort. Then Charles said he understood why the decision was made. The cost would be heavy inside the family, but the reason was clear. Trust had to mean something, or the crown would mean less. William heard those words and finally lowered his guard. The prince had feared Charles might call him too harsh, too fast, too cold. Instead, the king revealed through a private recorded conversation kept for the family archive that he had also been troubled by the Clarence House dinner. That revelation changed the room. William's concern had not been isolated. It had not been impulse. Charles had seen the warning too. Charles agreed the memorial could only be rescheduled under a new access rule. A new access rule means a strict set of instructions about who can arrive, who can enter, and who can approve changes. No informal family arrivals, no private additions, no exceptions. William nodded, but there was no victory in it. The prince knew Camilla would feel wounded, and Charles knew the queen consort would feel exposed. Still, father and son had reached the same painful truth. With them aligned, the palace prepared its response. But outside the gates, the world had already begun writing its own version of the story. And by the time the palace tried to control the message, the public had already seized one unforgettable image and turned it into the symbol of the day. The world did not see the private corridor, the crossed-out name, or Charles sitting in silence. The world saw one moment, Camilla's brother standing outside the venue, as royal security held the line, while the memorial guests turned away. That image traveled faster than the palace statement. By afternoon, the cancelled service was no longer a private family crisis. It had become a national royal reckoning. William knew the palace could not hide the cancellation for long. The prince had protected the service, but now he had to survive the story it created. The palace released a brief statement saying the memorial had been cancelled after a last-minute access concern. That phrase meant someone's presence or movement raised a serious question about who had permission to be near the event. The statement did not name Camilla's brother, but everyone understood where the pressure had begun. Camilla watched the coverage from a private room and felt each word like a fresh cut. The queen consort heard commentators discuss her family's access to royal spaces, and the shame returned with force. Royal spaces are protected places connected to official family duties, private ceremonies, and crown security. To have her brother spoken about in that context made Camilla feel exposed. She was not just defending a relative now. She was defending her own place inside the family. William saw the same coverage in silence. The prince understood that broadcasters were framing the story as a rare public sign of his authority. Some called it discipline. Others called it cruelty. But William knew the decision had not been made for pride. It had been made because a sensitive family event could not become a doorway for private influence. Charles listened as the story grew beyond the palace walls. The king understood the danger of public judgment, but he also understood why William had not stepped back. If Charles overruled him now, the monarchy would look weak. If he stood with him, Camilla would feel abandoned. The king was trapped between peace at home and strength in public. Then came the image that defined everything. The next morning, a London newspaper front page showed the venue gates under the headline, "The Service That Never Began." That single line turned the cancellation into history. Near St. James's Palace, a small crowd gathered with flowers meant for the memorial. Some praised William as a protector. Others said Camilla had been humiliated. Camilla heard both sides and said nothing. William heard both sides and did not move. Charles knew the headlines would fade, but the lesson would remain. Yet the final meaning of the cancellation would not be decided by headlines, but by what the family accepted when the noise finally faded. Because when the cameras moved on and the gates stood empty, the monarchy was left with one final truth it could no longer avoid. In the end, the cancelled memorial was not remembered only as a scandal. It became the day William chose duty over comfort, boundaries over silence, and the future over old habits. Camilla was wounded, Charles was forced to choose clarity, and the monarchy learned that even grief cannot survive without trust. One man stood outside a door, but the real decision happened inside the family. William returned to the rescheduled memorial with a quieter face. The prince knew this second attempt mattered more than the first, because now the service carried two burdens at once. It had to honor the memory it was created for, and it had to prove the family could still protect sacred moments from private pressure. The guest list was sealed, meaning no names could be added, changed, or quietly approved without formal permission. Arrivals were controlled. No informal family exceptions were allowed. Camilla arrived without her brother. The queen consort walked into the day with dignity, but the absence beside her said what no statement could. She remained hurt by the humiliation, and she still believed William had wounded her family in public. But Camilla also understood the truth she could no longer avoid. Her brother's presence outside the venue had given the prince a reason he could not ignore. The boundary had been crossed in the wrong place, at the worst time, on a day that demanded trust. Charles spoke to Camilla privately before the service began. The king chose his words carefully, because he knew she was still carrying the sting of being overruled. He told her the monarchy could not function if personal loyalty was allowed to override protected royal spaces. Protected royal spaces are places or events where access must be controlled because they involve family safety, official duty, or private remembrance. Charles did not speak with anger. He spoke with the sadness of a man asking his wife to accept a painful rule for the sake of something larger than both of them. William stood with the Order of Service in his hand. The Order of Service is the printed guide that shows the prayers, readings, and tributes for a ceremony, and this time it remained exactly where it belonged. The prince placed his hand over it for a brief moment before the memorial began. That small gesture carried the whole meaning of the day. The tribute had finally been restored with dignity. Camilla saw the gesture and said nothing. Charles saw it too, and the king accepted what had changed. William was no longer only the heir waiting for the future. He had become the guardian of the line before the crown ever reached him. The monarchy emerged bruised but clearer. Camilla felt the cost. Charles accepted the lesson. William drew the line and held it. Family may enter the palace, but trust decides how far they go. The story closes not with another question, but with a final image. The memorial finally beginning. The doors opening only after the line William drew had been honored. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.